Alright, so now the ship is really rolling over to the starboard side. Of course, when it was being towed, it was already listing over to one side, but now it's really going over with all of that water flooding in. Alright, welcome back to another episode of Recreating the Disasters. Today we're focusing on the Empress of Britain. So yeah guys, let's get into the video. Alright, so here we have the Empress of Britain, but before we get started, I want to point out something new that's been added to the game, and that is VIP server options. So this makes it super easy for us to recreate disasters, which means we can set the time, we can set the weather, and we're not sort of held back by the natural day and night cycle, as well as the weather cycle, so that is super cool. Alright, so Jake Hillen, I'll let you take it from here.
Yeah, so the keel of the Empress of Britain was laid down at the John Brown & Co. shipyard in Clydebank, Scotland on November 28, 1928. She would be launched in June of 1930. This would be the first launching ceremony in Britain that would be broadcasted by radio to Canada and the US. The Empress of Britain's sea trials began on April 11, 1931, where she reached a speed of 25.5 knots. Her maiden voyage to Quebec was on May 27, 1931. Because she would sail a more northern route where ice was common, the Empress of Britain was ordered to be fitted with an outer steel plating double the thickness at the stem, and for 150 feet back at either end, up to the waterline. Designed to carry 1,195 passengers, which consisted of 465 first class, 260 tourist class, and 470 third class, she would transport passengers between England and Quebec. She would be the first passenger liner designed specifically to be used as a cruise ship in the winter when the St. Lawrence River was frozen. The Empress of Britain was annually converted into an all first-class luxury cruise ship that carried up to 700 passengers. The Empress of Britain made 9 round trips in 1931 between Southampton and Quebec, carrying 4,891 passengers westbound and 4,696 passengers eastbound. To begin her winter cruise service, she made a westbound transatlantic trip to New York carrying 378 passengers. On December 3, 1931, she sailed on a 128-day around-the-world cruise. She would visit the Mediterranean, North Africa, and the Holy Land, through the Suez Canal and into the Red Sea, then to India, Ceylon, Southeast Asia, and the Dutch East Indies, on to China, Hong Kong, and Japan, then across the Pacific to Hawaii and California before traversing the Panama Canal back to New York. After an Atlantic crossing from New York to Southampton, she would enter a dry dock for maintenance and reinstallation of her outer propellers. Until 1939, this schedule would be duplicated with minor adjustments each year except for 1933. In June of 1939, the Empress of Britain sailed from Halifax to Conception Bay, St. John's, Newfoundland, and then eastbound to Southampton with her smallest but famous passenger list. 40 passengers were on board, which included King George VI, Queen Elizabeth, and 13 ladies and lords in waiting. After this voyage, the Empress of Britain returned to regular transatlantic service, but during the summer of 1939, war was inevitable. On September 2, 1939, one day before the United Kingdom would declare war, the Empress of Britain sailed on her last voyage for the Canadian Pacific, with the largest passenger list in her history. Filled beyond her capacity and with temporary berths in the squash court and other spaces, the Empress of Britain zigzagged across the Atlantic, arriving in Quebec on September 8, 1939. Upon her arrival, she was repainted gray and was laid up waiting for orders. On November 25, 1939, the Empress of Britain was requisitioned as a troop transport. She would first do 4 transatlantic trips taking troops from Canada to England. She was then sent to Wellington, New Zealand, returning to Scotland in June of 1940, a part of the $1 million convoy of 7 luxury liners. This convoy consisted of the Andes, Aquitania, Empress of Britain, Empress of Canada, Empress of Japan, the Mauretania, and the Queen Mary. In August of 1940, the Empress of Britain transported troops to Suez via Cape Town, returning with 224 military personnel and civilians, as well as a crew of 419. In August of 1940, the Empress of Britain transported troops to Suez via Cape Town, returning with 224 military personnel and civilians, as well as a crew of 419, which is where we are right now.
Alright, so thank you very much, Jake Hillen, and I guess we'll set sail, so here we go. Now, Jake Hillen, where is the general area that the Empress of Britain was sailing when the disaster would eventually occur?
It would be around 70 miles northwest of Ireland along the west coast.
While we're sailing, the Empress of Britain has actually got an interesting looking stern, similar to the one seen on the Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth. So that's actually pretty interesting. And these funnels here could be lit up or illuminated with lights, and they could be seen for miles. I think it was somewhere around 30 to 50 miles that you could see these funnels basically lit up in the night. But I would imagine as a troop ship, you wouldn't necessarily turn on those lights because you wouldn't want to be seen for 30 to 50 miles. So, yeah. Oh, hello. There is a water spout. So that's interesting. Alright, so I think we're nearing the area where the disaster would occur. So, Jake Hillen, do you want to take it over from here?
Yeah, so at around 9:20 a.m. on October 26, 1940, the Empress of Britain was spotted by a German Condor long-range bomber. The bomber strafed the Empress of Britain 3 times and struck her twice with 550-pound bombs. Only after the bomber returned to base in northern France would it be discovered which ship they attacked.
Alright, so there's Jake Hillen. He's in the bomber, and we should see him drop a couple bombs on the ship. Alright, there he is. He's coming in. And there he goes. And the bomb actually missed, which is good for us. Alright, here he comes for a second pass. There we go. There's a bomb dropped on the deck. Alright, so one more to go. He's coming in again. Alright. And there we go. And yep, there was an explosion, so that was 2 bombs dropped onto the Empress of Britain. Alright, so I'm going to stop temporarily, and now what would happen next?
It would be reported in the German news that the Empress of Britain had been sunk. Despite the chaos of the bomber's attacks and the fires, there were only a few casualties. The bomb started a fire that began to overwhelm the ship. At 9:50 a.m., the captain gave the order to abandon ship. The fire was primarily concentrated to the midsection, causing passengers to head for the bow and stern and hindering the launching of the lifeboats. Most of the crew were picked up by the destroyers HMS Echo and ORP Burza and the anti-submarine trawler, then HMS Capricorn. A skeleton crew remained on board. The fire would leave the ship unable to move, but her hull appeared to be intact and was not sinking besides a slight list. At 9:30 a.m. on October 27th, the Empress of Britain would be taken under tow with several ships following in the convoy.
And there's actually photos of the ship sort of listing over and on fire, which I'll show a couple on screen, and it's really impressive to see a ship of that size burning and listing onto its side.
The German submarine U-32 had been told about this and headed in that direction, which I'm actually doing right now. I'm heading towards where you last were in a submarine, or a U-boat rather.
Alright, I'll keep my eyes out for you, but right now I'm actually moving a little farther away to simulate the ship being under tow. Alright, so the sun is now beginning to set, and it would be the final sunset of the Empress of Britain. So, yeah, in a moment or two, we should be torpedoed, and that will be the end of this ship.
So U-32 eventually positioned herself towards the Empress of Britain, and 2 torpedoes were fired. The first would detonate prematurely, but the second one hit, causing a massive explosion.
So I'm imagining you are in position and ready to fire a torpedo?
Yep.
Not seeing anything. Oh, there we go. Massive explosion right there near the center of the ship. Alright, so am I expecting another torpedo in just a moment?
Yeah, but after the first torpedo impact, the crew of the destroyers and the convoy speculated this was caused by the fires aboard the liner, igniting her fuel tanks. U-32 maneuvered and fired a 3rd torpedo, which hit the ship just after the first impact. And this basically alerted the convoy, saying that this was not because of the fuel tanks and that they were under attack.
And there it is, right at the stern. So now the ship is going to start sinking. Alright, so now the ship is really rolling over to the starboard side. Of course, when it was being towed, it was already listing over to one side, but now it's really going over with all of that water flooding in. And you've also got to think, with damage to the ship from fire, the bombings, lots of water is going to make its way into those holes or broken windows or portholes and bring the ship down even faster. So, yeah, that's what we're seeing here, and eventually, the ship's tow lines were cut off or dropped, because, I mean, you don't want to be towing a sinking ship. And as you can see now, the ship is really not looking good, with the bow starting to come out of the water. And, yeah, we're about to hit bottom in just a moment. You can see the stern is hitting the bottom there, actually. There it goes. So yeah, that is the sinking of the Empress of Britain. If you guys have enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and a comment. And I'll see you all next time, guys. Goodbye.